Good morning, everyone, and welcome to you, Chief Constable, and your team to this August meeting in public. First of all, can I apologise for our late start to everybody in the room and also to those online. We had some technical issues this morning which delayed us. I have some opening remarks, Chief Constable, after which you can respond, and then we'll go on to questions. I'll start with resourcing. Over the course of the last few weeks, there have been a range of incidents which have affected policing. Resourcing pressures faced remains the number one focus, and the outworkings of this were demonstrated practically yesterday with the closure of 11 inquiry offices. We know that officers and staff are also feeling the pressures, and senseless attacks on officers and damage to vehicle just adds to all of those pressures. We were glad that staff strike action was averted in July, and efforts will now be focused on the service, working with the department to secure a resolution for the revised environmental allowance by the end of September, and we will be working on that very diligently. We do have a new government who have made new crime and justice commitments. We will continue the lobby for resourcing, but with consultation beginning in September on a new 5-year policing plan. If additional funding is not forthcoming, then sadly we will all need to be upfront with the public about demands and deliverables in the future visibility of policing with and obviously within communities. Moving on to violence against women and girls, Chief Constable. This month, the National Police Chiefs Council published a new report on violence against women and girls, describing the issue as a national epidemic. And of course, this week, the horrendous events in Southport have shocked us all, and our sympathies are with all of those affected. A lot of work has been put in by the PSNI in raising awareness of this issue, and we have new legislation in place. But the recent BBC Spotlight programme, Coerced and Killed, raised serious concerns regarding the handling of the police investigation into the murder of Katie Simpson. As a board, we cannot begin to understand the grief and distress that this has caused to Katie's family and friends, and they remain in our thoughts. There are many unanswered questions which need to be addressed for the family and wider public, as there needs to be transparency on this for public confidence. And as a board, we now need to make sure that the PSNI learn from those failings and any recommendations made are implemented. Chief Constable, we will be asking for a report on actions that have been taken by the PSNI in light of the Ombudsman's findings, any issues that have been identified internally requiring redress, and also any additional measures that need to be incorporated into the PSNI's Violence Against Women and Girls strategy in light of the newly published NPCC report. Moving on to the McCulloch review, which we're all familiar with. Chief Constable, we welcome that work has commenced by Angus McCulloch, reviewing up the police surveillance of journalists and other groups. As a board, we strongly encourage anyone concerned to make contact with the independent reviewer. As a board, we will be having a discussion with Angus in the coming weeks, and we will be writing to him in advance of that. The board, as you know, has agreed that it will await the conclusion of this review and the IPT tribunal hearing before considering any further actions. Transparency and accountability on issues being discussed today are essential for wider confidence, so these are issues that will remain on the agenda in the time ahead. Finally, I wanted to touch on the data breach. Next week marks the anniversary of the major data breach. Since then, there has been a range of reviews and actions taken forward to restore confidence within and outside the service. The board has now received the implementation plan developed by the new PSNI data board, and which we will now consider. Chief Constable, can we now take your opening comments, and then we will move to questions.
Thank you, Chair, and I very much welcome your comments, some of which I will remark on now. Firstly, I want to start with what happened on Sunday evening, if I may, and I would ask everybody to look at my introductory comments in the report that we provided with you today, but that didn't include me understandably commenting on what happened on Sunday night at Camera. So on Sunday evening, Various people sent me footage of police vehicles with emergency lights and sirens sounding, celebrating with the people of Camler Armagh's All-Ireland final victory. My reaction to that footage is very straightforward, as you might expect. We are the police. And that privilege and responsibility demands that at all times we act professionally and independently. That did not happen on Sunday night in Camler. I'm very alive to the polarised commentary which has taken place since the footage came to light, which demonstrates yet again that policing in Northern Ireland remains something of a lightning rod for society. I've had many, many phone calls in both condemnation and support of the officers' actions. Some have asked for the officers to be suspended or even sacked, whilst others have supported the officers and called for commendations for them. Let me be crystal clear. No one is being suspended, no one is being sacked, and no one is being relocated. However, nor do I support the officers of the actions of the officers. It's not lost on me that earlier on Sunday evening, we issued a post on local Armagh social media highlighting, rightly congratulating Armagh on the All-Ireland final win, but highlighting the fatal 5 road safety messages that we constantly remind people about drivers driving responsibly and safely. We've had far too many road deaths and serious injuries on our roads in recent months, which we've discussed at this board. Then later that evening, police vehicles were seen driving in Camler in a manner which was at best irresponsible. I, of course, understand the sentiment of what those officers were seeking to do in supporting the local community in Armagh's, quite frankly, brilliant win. But there are many ways to show that support. Driving in that manner is not one of them. We are conducting an internal investigation into what happened, which will be proportionate and will not be unduly influenced by anyone or any phone calls to me. Policing is and will remain independent. Finally, having seen the response to the events in Camler, I ask that everyone get something of a perspective and that we all think, as you mentioned, Chair, of those poor families in Southport, where on Monday we became aware of these awful and murderous attacks against those children. They are the people who should be in our prayers. Having seen the reports of those awful attacks on those children and 2 adults, I immediately reached out to the Chief Constable of Merseyside. I offered her my support and all of our condolences. I'm also, I have to of course say, disheartened by the public disorder that we've now seen and that's occurred due to misinformation on social media about those tragic events in Southport. The dangers of inaccurate and unsubstantiated claims being spread around should not be lost on anyone. And I know that especially should be well understood in Northern Ireland. Chair, regarding your remarks about scrutiny and the tragic death of Katie Simpson and the Spotlight programme, I would like to respond. This was a shocking crime with a devastating impact on that family. The crime itself was shocking enough to endure for that family. The aftermath of the reporting and the examination of how the matter was initially dealt with, no doubt has brought even more upset and trauma, and that is not lost on me. I am meeting the family in the near future and very much look forward to talking to them about what we did and did not do and what we got wrong. I am limited, and we should all remember this, in what we can say about these events, as the Ombudsman is yet to provide the complainants with their written determination. We're also waiting for information on any future inquest. But please be assured, I have read extensively about this matter. That includes the post-mortem reports, the doctor's reports, the Ombudsman's reports, and a number of statements. And I've spoken to a number of people. it is abundantly clear to me that we got things wrong from the beginning. There are a number of shortcomings in our initial investigation. We relied far too much on the lack of any presenting medical evidence around what had happened to Katie when she was first admitted to hospital, and on the forensic post-mortem that was conducted on the 11th of August 2020. As I said, I've read that post-mortem report and the consultant's notes pre the procedure. The autopsy sets out that it's impossible with certainty to say whether or not Katie's death occurred by hanging, although there was a mark there that could have caused this to have occurred. There was, however, nothing in that autopsy report to indicate the death was due to some other cause. I know too, tragically from my own history as a detective, that owing to the length of time between Katie being admitted to hospital on the 3rd and her tragic death and then the post-mortem examination on the 11th, that evidence would have dissipated that was vital to have been identified and recovered from when Katie was first admitted to hospital. We were not professionally curious enough, which is something I ask for all the time, and we did not do enough initially in responding to some of the concerns that were being raised. Even our systems failed to identify Cresswell's previous significant and related serious offending. In my view, this is less about individual officers' actions and more about this organisation not getting this right, and that's not acceptable. I can't apologise enough to the family for the delay in getting the right response, which happened 4 months later. I've made it very clear to everyone that work needs to be done. Much of it, by the way, has been undertaken and is clear that we've made significant improvements, and I will ensure that work continues. My concerns are not just about the PSNI and how we initially responded, however. It's how a man previously convicted of such a heinous and similar crime, and from what we now know was a controlling and coercive individual, almost on an industrial scale, how he became something of a poster boy, accepted in society, and no one put their hand up and reported it. There are wider issues than just with regards to this organisation, and I look forward to working with partners to see what we can do to make sure this never happens again. And I've already spoken to a number of significant individuals to try and support and assist us in doing that. I will say I'm very grateful for the major investigation team who arrested and diligently investigated and prosecuted Cresswell. And I want to especially acknowledge the bravery and fortitude of the family who have to live with the consequence of what that man did every single day. In relation to the Spotlight programme, I welcome current affairs programmes. I welcome these investigatory programmes because they hold our hand to the flame and make sure that we're doing everything we should do. However, I want to correct some public misperceptions following the airing of this programme regarding DCI John Caldwell. The programme was disparaging of, in my view, and damaging to his professional reputation and in turn public confidence in the police. Comments included in the programme were also not reflective, having read the material, of the facts. John is not subject to misconduct proceedings. He did not conduct the role of senior investigating officer at any stage in relation to the case. In my view, probably the primary reason for his detention on Mr. Caldwell is because he's a known public figure for very, very sad and tragic reasons. And the use of his name and perceived role is considered interesting to the public rather than in disparaging any public interest, in discharging any public interest. It's unfortunate this issue distracts from the tragic death of Katie and the important lessons that can be properly learned and will be learned by police and other authorities. I've been assured by the police ombudsman as recently as yesterday that John is not subject to any misconduct proceedings. If anyone has issues about police officers' actions, there are statutory and independent frameworks to investigate such issues. Let them do their work. speak to me. I'll make sure that there's no cover-ups, and we've got things wrong, we'll put them right. I want to reiterate, though, that everyone's focus should be on what happened to Katie and her family, and for all of us to respond in a way that avoids these predatory crimes from occurring again. I want to briefly now, if I may, just speak about, and again, it was referenced in your opening remarks, Chair, the anniversary of the data breach, which was the 8th of August last year, 1 year on. The organisation still feels the impacts of that data breach. I'm very conscious that for a number of our officers and staff, particularly those from the nationalist Catholic community, they felt especially vulnerable with regards to the information that was released. We have done a huge amount of work led by the Deputy Chief Constable, Chris Todd, to address those issues. But I wanted to note this anniversary and assure staff that we're very much still focused on ensuring that anybody who uses that information will be pursued through the courts. As you know, we have ensured that each of the officers who required it have had additional personal security provided to them, and we've devalued the data that's been lost by taking measures to ensure that the information itself is devalued. Finally, Chair, you mentioned resourcing. I mentioned this at length in my introduction, and the message does not seem to be getting through. The PSNI has continued to be a net loser compared with all other key public services in Northern Ireland since 2010, and this has to stop. The issue is linked to everything we're asked to do, including some of the issues I've already spoken about this morning. We need to get the protection of society in Northern Ireland right, but we need the resources to do it. As I say, the message is clearly not landing, but for the avoidance of doubt, since 2010, there's been a downturn in any proper funding for the PSNI. The health budget in that time has increased from 3.5 billion to it was 6.6 billion before the recent budget monitoring. It's now gone up to over 7.5 billion. Education went from 2.7 billion to 3.4 billion. And again, that's increased significantly from that point. In that time, the police budget was cut by 3%. Taking into account inflationary pressures, that's more akin to 29%. The Patent Commission established that the PSNI officer numbers should be at 7,500. We're now, as you know, at circa 6,300. Patent also reminded me when I spoke to him that that number, in additionality, there were 2,500 reservists that could be stood up at time of need. We no longer have anywhere near that number. We've had probably around 170 reservists now in Northern Ireland. Since my arrival, we've done some independent analysis about what we need. And being conservative, we need at least 8,000 police officers. The figures speak for themselves. This has led to reduced neighbourhood functions, less visible officers, slower response times, slower investigations, and obviously recently we reported the closure of 11 front counters. The PSNI remains a world-class organisation because the people in it are world-class, but we will make mistakes, and where we do, we'll put them right. I've taken the decision to recommence recruitment because we cannot go any lower than the numbers we're now at. I ask for the support of this board and everybody in Northern Ireland who has a voice to make sure that the predicament that we now find ourselves in is arrested. I'm sure the consequences of our unacceptably low funding has an impact on what we can actually do is connected to a number of issues that we'll speak about today. The low numbers is having a far-reaching impact not only on the service we provide, but on the well-being of the organisation. You're aware that we had a member of our staff commit suicide, and I'm informed that's related to the work pressures. And I see more and more evidence of concerns of those sorts of well-being issues in the organisation, of which I will speak more about at a future board meeting. And with that, I welcome any questions from the board.
Thank you, Chief Constable. We'll move straight to questions. First one is from Linda Dillon. Question on the Katie Simpson murder and lessons learned.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Chief Constable for your opening remarks. My question is about the killing of Katie Simpson and obviously the spotlight show that was aired. I'm glad to hear that you're meeting with Katie's family, and I sincerely hope that when you do, regardless of any investigations, recommendations, or anything else, that you'll listen to with a very open mind what that family have to say, what they've been through, and their understanding of the processes, because that's the only way you'll genuinely get an understanding of how to address it. So in that light, I suppose I want you to specifically outline what you as a service can do to make sure this never happens again. So can you tell me what processes have been put in place already and what the plan is to implement any further measures? For example, have there been any conversations with Women's Aid? Mary Brown outlined that they very well knew what Jonathan Cresswell was like and what he was capable of because they were dealing with a previous victim. And I suppose on that basis, I do have to just take you up on the point of that nobody in society knew what Jonathan Cresswell was like. People did, but they weren't asked, unfortunately. So is there any type of process that can be put in place to make sure that there is information sharing? And many abusers are poster boys. That's the problem. We know that. So we should never accept on face value that someone is or isn't an abuser. Hugh Edwards yesterday pled guilty to what he had done, but he previously was presenting on our TV screens as somebody who was an upright individual and nobody would have questioned him, but people did know. So it's about how we information share, and it's about how we take nobody on face value. Anybody in this room is capable of being an abuser. Anybody in this room is capable of being a victim, and we should never, ever forget that. I think we need to keep that in our minds at all times, and that is what will genuinely change culture.
So, just to go to your point about people knew about his previous offending, they did. But my point, Linda, is that in advance of what happened to Katie, nobody was coming to us to say that he was involved in relationships with women and doing what he was doing. There seemed to have been an acceptance within the equine community about this individual and a trust towards him that I cannot understand. And I'm not criticising anybody, because I have said this organisation has a huge amount to do to learn the lessons of how we deal with investigations into deaths when they are not, and there was no grip here, they're not allocated to an officer to take responsibility in the way I would have expected this to have occurred in 2020. That would not happen now. But my point is that nobody raised a flag about him to us with the offending he was clearly committing. We know that from the other convictions that have occurred. So that's the first point. That's a societal issue that I think we've all got to learn lessons from. With regards to Marie Brown, I've reached out to Marie Brown and a number of other people about this case. I've spoken to Marie on the telephone. We're going to meet. I've also spoken to Geraldine Hanna. You know, and I've mentioned to this forum that I want this organisation to do three things. I want us to be victim focused. I want us to be communities focused. And we have to be workforce focused because we've got so few people. We've got to look after them. This is about being victim focused. Since the events of August 2020, we have written a new strategy, an action plan to address violence against women and girls. We're coming up to the 2-year anniversary of that. And we are going to ensure that all the lessons learned from this case are implemented through the revision of that process. We are already in a place where we have changed the structures of the organisation so that this sort of incident should not fall between any cracks of responsibility. I will bring in Assistant Chief Constable David Beck on this. We've done a huge amount of work to address the concerns that were raised to us through the Ombudsman's report. We've addressed those concerns with the individuals, we've addressed those concerns within the organisation, and we'll continue to do that. And working with others coming in, so we're not marking our own homework. And it's something that, and I'll come to the meeting with the Crestwell, with Katie's family shortly. We know we've got work to do. We're not the only ones. We focus far too much on the failure of any medical evidence presenting in this case. We didn't listen to people who are trying to raise flags, including some of our own people who rightfully said there should be real concerns about Cresswell's behaviour, his behaviour at the time and his behaviour subsequently, his behaviour at the hospital. We only spoke to Cresswell at the hospital. We didn't speak to the family from what I've seen. Huge lessons to be learned. And in that, guys, I can absolutely assure you that when I see that family, there are going to be a couple of meetings at the very least. I will be listening to what they've got to say. And I cannot even begin to understand what they've been through. I'd like, though, to bring in Davey because he can provide some additional information around the actual work that's been done since 2020.
Thanks, Linda. And can I just start by saying that this was an absolutely shocking and tragic crime that has left a family and indeed a community devastated. And let me be absolutely clear, as the Chief has said, there were shortcomings in the initial police investigation. And for that, I too am deeply sorry. We are committed to learning from this case, and the recommendations made by the Ombudsman have already been actioned. And if I can outline some of those. So a policy recommendation was accepted and actioned by PSNI in November 2023 regarding a review of the Death Investigation Service instruction. This was to provide additional safeguards, including the requirement that a sergeant must attend the scene of every death. The sergeant should be satisfied as to the proper extent of the police inquiries made or required to be made into the incident, and to make an initial assessment as to the nature of the cause of death. A CID detective sergeant should be tasked immediately to physically attend the scene where the initial sergeant believes that that death is suspicious. In addition to that, a detective inspector should be consulted where the CID detective sergeant believes that the death is suspicious. And again, consideration given to the tasking and attendance of CSI at the scene. On-call MIT are also available and shall be tasked if the death is suspicious or indeed a confirmed homicide. In the case of a sudden and unexplained death of an infant, our public protection branch officers should be tasked, and a child abuse investigation unit officer should attend those scenes. Recommendations were made, accepted, and have been implemented in respect of enhanced formal handover procedures and supervision requirements when an investigation is being handed from one unit to another unit. And that's to ensure that that's formally recorded and there is absolute clarity in terms of the ownership of that investigation. But I would have to say we have moved beyond the Ombudsman recommendations and changed our operating model across the crime department, bringing CID and MIT under one command and leadership team. And I think that provides significantly greater alignment of investigative resource, but also provides enhanced oversight across investigation and enhanced decision-making in respect of those investigations. You mentioned training, and further training in related to the learning from this case has been identified. And we are working with the DOJ, and in doing so, we have secured funding for places on a domestic homicide training, timeline training program. This is a program has been developed by Professor Jane Monkton-Smith. Jane is a leading authority in respect of coercive control, which effectively was at the core of this case. And she's also the author of the Domestic Homicide Timeline. So this training explores and provides a greater understanding of the link between coercive control, homicide, suicides, and those that may be made to look like a suicide. So I think it's really pertinent and relevant to this case and the learning from it. This training has already been undertaken by a number of our public protection branch officers. and we will now seek to roll that out further and expand delivery across both public protection branch, our MIT teams, and indeed local policing. As a service, we absolutely remain committed to doing all we can to protect the most vulnerable in our communities and reduce violence against women and girls. We are approaching, as the Chief said, the end of year 2 of the PSNI Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan, which was initiated on the 27th of September 2022. During this time and over the 2 years, we have made significant progress in respect of that action plan. So 33 out of the 41 actions created under that plan will be complete by the end of year 2. And the areas addressed have included standards of vetting and our behaviour, a focus on the relentless pursuit of perpetrators, and work to make the public spaces safer for all. I wish to today reaffirm this work and refocus our efforts in respect of violence against women and girls. And we will add an additional 13 new actions for year 3 and beyond as we continue to really challenge ourselves and our delivery for the public in respect of this really important area of policing. Those additional actions are currently being developed, but they will include further development of our service vetting structures, a refresh of our organisational statement of intent in respect of violence against women and girls, further continuous professional development to ensure we understand fully professional standards and processes consistent across all ranks and grades, the implementation of a bystander campaign, which I think touched to the points that the Chief made, the development of a sexual abuse in the workplace strategy, the development and embedding of the use of Vigilant across PSNI, which is in respect of safer places, the development of a rape victim survey, the development of scrutiny panels for rape no prosecution outcomes. But I have to say this is a societal issue, and as the Chief mentioned, and therefore we cannot do this on our own, and consequently I am keen that we develop a number of actions to really broaden and deepen our objectives with partners now that we have a devolved government, and that will include the review of the MARAC process. It's something that was spoken at in terms of performance board on a number of occasions, support for the TEO around the development of the perpetrator strategy in respect of domestic abuse in Northern Ireland. Again, there needs to be that focus on perpetrators, and to continue to develop that safer nighttime economy strategy for Northern Ireland. But as we develop these objectives, absolutely we're committed to consulting with a range of stakeholders, including Women's Aid, to ensure that these are both challenging, but also that they are of real value in terms of the work that we want to take forward in addressing violence against women and girls, and to ensure that the issues raised in this case are included and addressed in respect of that. I would propose, Chair, that we continue to report to you and the board through the Performance Committee in terms of the delivery against the Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan, to ensure that there is appropriate oversight moving forward and appropriate challenge, but also that there's appropriate advocacy and support from the board in respect of ensuring that we have the ability to deliver this work. But we will not be complacent in terms of any of these issues. And in addition to what is already planned in terms of SIGINI reviews over the next 6 years in respect of public protection, we have initiated a review of our own response and investigation to rape and serious sexual offences, and that will involve the National Operations Satoria team. That team is a collaborative programme led by the National Police Chiefs Council, which brings together police forces and academics, police leads to use evidence and new insights to ensure that the police services transform their response to rape and serious sexual offences. So that will ensure that our practices are benchmarked against those national standards, and that our investigative model is in line with those standards and best practice, and we really challenge ourselves in that regard. You know, we have seen a fall in Northern Ireland in respect of sexual offences, homicides, rape, and indeed violence against women and girls. But we all understand that those figures are still far too high, And we know that many, many victims will choose not to report matters to the police. So we need to continue to work with all parties and with all partners to ensure that there is no crisis of confidence in this regard. We are here 24/7 every day, and we will respond to the needs of victims in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, for the question. And Davy, there is a supplementary on that from Nulis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for your comments, but some number of my questions actually arise out of the comments that you gave just in your opening statement. And I would like to ask, first of all, I would set out again my sympathies with Katie's family, and that her legacy needs to be that this does not ever happen again to another woman or young girl in our society. I just want to ask, following your statements, if it was in fact a forensic postmortem following Katie's death, and whether then that makes a difference as to whether it was or it wasn't. And you also raised an issue of failure of medical evidence presented. However, it is my understanding from those that have come forward to the public and to the Ombudsman that there were in fact medical professionals who sought to give evidence or give statements to the police with regards to what they saw of Katie. So your statement has confused me in terms of failure of medical evidence presented despite medical professionals witnessing some of the things that they saw that day in the 5 days, and then wishing to bring those to the attention of the police. I just think that there's a little bit of a difference there in what has been presented both to the public and to the police in the immediate days and months following Katie's death and before her death as well. And I would also like to ask, following the Spotlight investigation, there have been a number of people who have now come forward, number of names of which I've given you in the past, and I have not received any update of potential, and I use the word potential, further victims whose deaths have been considered a suicide, but family members and friends are presenting their own evidence, and I use the word again, potential, and where it has not, they do not believe that it would be a suicide. And I just want to know if you do have an update or are making further inquiries into those people whose names have been put forward. And we know as a board, I raised this as an issue earlier, that this is something that we as a board should re-examine further.
So firstly, yes, it was a forensic postmortem, and what doesn't help anybody is this third party referencing and stuff. Let due process occur. The Ombudsman has investigated the allegations against the officers. Let them report, let them do their written determinations to the complainants. Also, there is, I would expect there to be an inquest, and I know the coroner that has been appointed is seeking contact with the family. With regards to the evidence, I've read the post-mortem report. I've read the notes of the consultant and the doctor. There was, you're right, a family friend who was a nurse who saw Katie and raised concerns from seeing her in a hospital bed about the consistency of, if you like, the Cresswell account. That's where I say we didn't listen to people enough. But we did get a forensic post-mortem. Now, I am not in any way, if your words, and words can be very important, communication is important, I am not criticising the medical professionals because I know what a difficult job they've got. This is on us for not listening to other people and then pursuing lines of inquiry about Cresswell, about where was Katie's phone, about what was his movements, why did he not go straight to the hospital when he was told to. But I think it entirely unhelpful and unprofessional to make allegations publicly that are not substantiated and not been properly investigated. And there are statutory processes to do that. So follow the statutory processes, please. With regards to we had a meeting, you want to air that in public. You raised a number of other concerns with me. Yes, we have pursued those. Yes, I have had reporting back. And yes, I am meeting one family, and I'm happy to discuss that off table. But there is nothing in any of those cases that currently raises an alarm with me. And if there is anything, and let me deal with this, that because it's interesting society here. Everybody thinks there's cover-ups everywhere. I am relatively new to this role. I'm in no club. I'm in nobody's pocket. And if there is anything that's not been done properly, I will pursue it. I would not allow anything to damage the reputation of this organisation, but I would most definitely and clearly not allow anything to damage the safeguarding of people like Katie and other women that are subject to this disgraceful behaviour, mainly obviously by men. So I'm happy to talk to you about that off table. The names that you gave me have been looked at. Nothing has caused me a concern. I am seeing a family, and please let due process take its course.
Yes, sure, go ahead.
No, thank you for that answer. And I do believe that in order to ensure that we get to the end of every investigation, that there has to be due process. So I want to ask if any of the cases that have been recommended for misconduct, if any of those officers have had their recommendations or charges, I'm not sure what the correct term is, have been dismissed under.
Are we talking about the pony investigation into Katie's death? So there were 18, I think the correct description is complaints against police. Okay. All of the findings of the Ombudsman with regards to misconduct have now been dealt with, and I will hand over to Chris, who deals with conduct issues. What I will say about those, and it's right that that process takes place and those officers have been subjected to those misconduct meetings, that misconduct process. But I want to be clear, this is an organisational issue. We got this wrong. Nobody owned, nobody gripped the serious injuries to Katie. There is a policy around how to deal with death investigations. Now, Katie obviously, tragically, was very poorly for a number of days between the 3rd and the 9th of August. But the spirit of that should have been applied. And inquiries that should have been done were not done. Other inquiries were done to try and pursue, if you like, the truth of what had happened. But in my opinion, not enough. And some officers were raising flags that others felt that the thing to determine whether there was foul play was the post-mortem. And as I've explained, we shouldn't have relied entirely on the post-mortem because it was nigh on impossible for the pathologist to determine how Katie died, nigh on impossible. And the post-mortem report says that there was no other evidence of any other cause of death. So had nothing to go on other than the information that had come from Cresswell, had come from the man who'd committed this murder. And we'd accepted that too readily, bearing in mind his history, bearing in mind what others were saying. So was there any definitive medical evidence contrary to that? No, this was the medical evidence. But was there a medical professional who had an association with the family who went to see Katie as a friend, who was concerned about what she saw and raised that concern? Yes. But if I could just hand to Chris around the misconduct element of your question.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Nuala. There's very little I can say at the moment, to be frank. You'll be aware that misconduct proceedings in Northern Ireland, the legislation is such that they are private proceedings, so I can't give the detail of the outcome. Suffice to say that the 18 officers that the Ombudsman focused upon, they directed misconduct proceedings against 3, and those are being dealt with. But as the Chief mentioned earlier, the Ombudsman is yet to provide its final report to the family, and I think we owe it to the family to ensure that they are communicated with first in this instance. So I will be in touch with the Ombudsman again to find out when that will be, and as soon as we are able to share more information, we will. But at the moment, that's as much as I can share, I'm afraid.
Okay. We have a supplementary from Trevor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can I thank you, Chief, in terms of your introduction? And like others, I would like to be associated, obviously, to our sympathies to the family in this case. I think what you said in relation to naming an officer is a reminder to us all, particularly the politicians who do some of these programs, to be cautious about introducing someone's name in such a manner. So I'm listening to all of that. Offline, before we come in here today, and it's actually interesting what you have said about the changes from 2020. We had a conversation, I thought Nuala may have covered that actually in her supplement as well. We see a pattern in other areas, even in my district. On the April of this year, a young girl found in peculiar circumstances. But we believe, and the family believes, that enough lessons haven't been learned. The family's crying out for further contact in this case. This young girl was subject to a rape allegation, or the subject of a rape, but was found in suspicious circumstances in her flat. And it seems in this case again, the lessons haven't been learned. So I think part of the conversation we were having is, whilst we welcome, and Davy went into a lot of detail, all of those things sound good, but are they actually going to work in practice? Because I can say for this family in my constituency, that doesn't seem to be the case. Right down to the very fact that the investigating officers are not making much contact with the family or giving them the assurances that they require. So once I hear what you say, and I welcome what you say, and I do believe you've said it in earnest, I think we need a conversation, possibly offline, about other cases that some of us hear of and concerns that other families have of cases with similarities. And I'm sure, can I ask, would you be open to that?
So you have a chief constable who will look at any individual case around investigations where there are concerns, because that's my history, that's my background. I have looked at a couple of the cases that were referenced by Nuala and had research on them where there simply isn't anything to suggest there's foul play where the inquiries have been done. They were not done in the case of Katie Simpson. It's hard for me to comment at all on your example, Trevor, without me leaning into it as I do, and for us to have an off-table discussion, which I will do. And I will, as you know, I will meet the family. What Davey has outlined is you've got to have a proper process and structure to deal with these things. There was a gap in 2020. I believe that gap has been addressed. But processes and structures only take you so far. The professional determination, which was exhibited by some officers in the Katie Simpson case, one of whom I spoke to very recently, who was constantly raising this issue, a detective sergeant, about concerns about foul play. We have got to make sure that all of our officers and staff are alive to the types of crimes that are the most harmful to society, like violence against women and girls, like hate crime. I have a concern that because of our numbers, and this isn't me scaremongering, where we ask them to do certain inquiries, where people raise concerns about what may have happened, they've got to go on to the next call. They've got to deal with the next inquiry. And they don't get back to people as quickly as they should. Our caseloads concern me in the major investigation team. All of these consequences will have a collateral impact on what we can do. And that's why we have a workforce. And on the data that I've seen, we have more people who are off duty through sickness than other forces elsewhere in the UK, considerably higher numbers. And I think the effects of not being funded since 2010 are having a collateral impact. But again, when the MIT team at Gough picked up this investigation in January, they did a super job. And they really pursued the truth with regards to Cresswell's awful activity. We have an incredible workforce. Our job at this table, and I know everybody is committed to what I've heard today from Linda, from Nuala, from you, around getting this right. But I have a significant professional concern that we don't get the resources to do the job. We will have more risks with, regardless of process, of the human beings that we have not having the time available to do what they need to do. But that's something that we'll pursue not only today, but beyond this meeting. And I'm happy to speak to you about that case and meet that family. Okay.
Thank you. Mark Durkin has another question.
So thank you, Chair. Again, our thoughts are with Katie's family and all those affected by Cresswell and by this case. In terms of police shortcomings, I suppose there have been that many failings. It's difficult to know which one to focus on. But how and why did PSNI systems fail to identify Cresswell's previous serious offences?
So some of that detail I don't know as I sit here today. What I can say is when a check was done on Cresswell, flags that should have come up on our niche system about his previous offending, from my reading into the Ombudsman's report, did not come up. That now can't happen. There's been a fix on that. In fact, if Cresswell was alive today and he was, his name was checked, a number of flags would come up about him. So that's a fix. Mark, why that didn't happen in 2020 when those officers checked his names, I don't know. I don't know if Dave can help with that. What I can tell you is that's no longer the position. Okay.
Yeah, I'll add briefly, and that does feature in the Ombudsman's report. So again, I'm conscious that is yet to be formally released and the closure report provided to the families. But again, there have been significant issues in terms of the recording and flagging of offending and the requirements for that in the intervening time. And the guidance around the Papani procedures have changed over that period as well. And some of Cresswell's offending predated some of those requirements around flags, markers, and the arrangements that would fall into place now. So, we're in a much better place. But as the Chief has alluded to, there were shortcomings, there were failures in terms of some of that work at the time. Some of that was based on the time and the requirements of that time, which have clearly moved on. And I think we will review those issues in detail when the full report is released and the family have been notified in terms of those issues.
Okay, thank you. Chief Constable, before we move on to the next question, as I said in my opening remarks, the NPCC have said that violence against women and girls is a national epidemic. I welcome the work that Davy Beck has said that you've already taken on board from the recommendations. We wait the full report and just to look at what other recommendations that are there and how you're going about implementing it, and that report obviously in writing to us as well. We've also heard from a number of representatives here about other cases that are ongoing, which makes it even more serious for us as a board to know that this is going on. So I think we will, as a board, be looking at this and asking you to come and meet with us in relation to what we can do to highlight this issue and to improve the way victims are looked after and how victims are prevented from becoming victims. So we will be doing that in the future. Could I move on to the next question from Peter Osborne, and a question on budgeting?
Thanks, Chair. It's a very sobering conversation around the programme and what happened. And I suppose, as you said, Chief Constable, budgeting affects the effectiveness of all things in all organisations. We've had this conversation a few times before, but I noticed in your remarks, I think, a hardening of some of the language you used around the budgeting situation. So can I ask you 3 or 4 particular questions on it? We discussed at the last meeting, I don't think you were there, about the Paramilitary Crime Task Force, and I think it has a budget until March 2025, which is 6 or 7 months away. Can you update us about that situation, whether it will continue to be funded beyond the end of this financial year? Can you talk to us about the budget that you're anticipating, not just in this financial year, but in the next financial year, taking you up to the spring 2026. And you talked about how Patton suggested 7,500 officers. As things stand within the budget and what you anticipate, how many police officers do you think you will have by spring 2026? And finally, I talked about the paramilitary crime task force, whether it's paramilitarism or organised crime. Those are people who will have the ability to plan over a succession of years and probably put budgets towards what they want to do unlawfully over that number of years. We've talked about multi-annual planning for the PSNI. How has that progressed, and are you able to multi-annually plan to prevent crime and organised crime in a way that they can plan to carry it out?
So I'll go through that list, Peter, and some of it, unfortunately, there are so many unknowns. But if I start with the PSNI budget, so we this year, 24-25, currently have a 33 million pound shortfall, and I have no idea how we're going to address that. No discussions have taken place because of the in-year budgets about 25-26, so I cannot answer that question. Patton recommended 7,500 officers. I do, and I've mentioned this already today, often remind people of what Chris Patton said to me, that it's 10,000, John, because 2,500 reservists because of the particular and unique situation in Northern Ireland. And that was based on a peaceful position in Northern Ireland. I plan to maintain the current numbers at circa 6,300. And that's where we will be in March 2025, because I'm continuing to recruit. That's the minimum that I say we can possibly go to. We've gone far below where we should be now. So we are at a dangerous position with regards to the resourcing of the PSNI. I've made that very clear. And I cannot accept that we can reduce any further because of what we're asked to deliver, much of which is discussed in these meetings. Whether there's been any progress on acquiring multi-annual budget settlements, as you all know, I met with, it's been reported, I met with the Prime Minister when he was appointed. I raised the issue of funding with him. I've actually explored with, in conversations with the First Deputy First Minister, the PM, Secretary of State and the Justice Minister, some sort of ring fence funding to recover us. But that hasn't led to any, in any way, any agreements thus far. I did note that this week the Chancellor made a commitment to multi-year spending reviews, which I welcome and is a positive move. And I see that the Finance Minister here has welcomed any move to multi-year spending reviews. That will allow us to do some form of longer-term planning. But that's got to be accompanied by proper funding. And we're not asking the PSNI for more money than's received in England or Wales or Scotland. We just want parity because we've fallen behind. And then around the PCTF, that funding does end in March of 2025. Discussions have begun with the Department of Justice and others, because that causes me a significant concern because of the incredibly important work they do in specific communities. But that hasn't resulted in any clarity as yet as to funding moving forward. But I just want to ask Pamela or Mark if there's anything they want to add to what I've said. I think possibly not. But
Let's go.
Right.
Just briefly, we talk about March 2025. That's 6 to 7 months away. I'm assuming those folk. I'm assuming those folk need to plan their workload, and that planning should be taking place now. But how can you plan if you don't know whether you're going to be in that position? Or are they looking at other things that they should be applying for or doing? It's really not a satisfactory situation to have them 6 months before March 2025, not knowing whether it still exists.
So that's the position for the whole organisation. I have to tell you, everything, we don't know year on year what our budget is going to be. And it was an interesting school day. Every day is a school day for me here, but it's an interesting school day when it became apparent that we wouldn't get last year's budget reconciled until the March. So we didn't know until going into March what our budget for that year settlement would be when we got a significant amount of money to address our gap then. I mean, it is no way to run any form of public services anywhere. But because you mentioned, obviously, specifically the Paramilitary Crime Task Force, I just want to bring Davey in to see if there's any additional remarks on contingencies.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And conscious this was raised at the last meeting as we were approaching that cliff edge. And just to put on record my thanks to the board for their support and advocacy around extension of that funding. So the current position is that a series of meetings have progressed things to the point where it has been agreed to put a proposal to the minister to extend that programme for a further 2 years. Clearly, that has not been fully resolved as yet, and then that proposal will have to go to the TEO for approval as it is a TEO programme. So I think we're making progress. I think there's still work to be done in terms of getting that over the line, and I suppose, again, I would appeal just to the board for some support and advocacy in that respect.
Thank you. Frank has a supplementary on budgeting as well, I believe.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Chief Constable, every time we turn on TVs, listen to radios, read newspapers, all we hear is the need for more and more budget to be thrown at education and health. Because of your updates here, the board, as a board, we're aware and share the concern with you and the dire consequences that the budget and consequently the resource shortfall will have on the safety for all our citizens. I joined this board 4 years ago, and we had about 7,100 officers with this great plan to get to 7,500. We're now sitting 4 years later, 800 of a shortfall even on that number. And as you say, the messages don't seem to be landing. And I strongly believe, and I did a wee poll of some of the people who would claim to be my friends, did they know these numbers? Did any of the numbers mean anything to them? And they were shocked when they heard that sort of. But people are oblivious to everybody what it means and what's the consequence of such a thing. So you mentioned in your remarks to us about the support that we can bring. Can you clarify what you mean? How everybody can help? How we can galvanize people? How we can get it into those with the purse strings that, hey, there's just not health and education. You have to look at other places as well.
So there's so much, I think, that we all individually, but also collectively can do because the message clearly isn't getting through. I was sent a clip of Stephen Nolan show recently where a retired police officer was talking about the challenges in policing. And Stephen Nolan was saying, well, we don't hear about this. These are public forums. We release my comments in advance. There's a report that people can see with my remarks about our dire situation. I answer questions regularly, publicly and privately about this. I think one of the biggest challenges is generally conscious that we've talked about some very emotional and important cases today. Overwhelmingly, the people of Northern Ireland do not come into contact with the PSNI. They do with the health service, they do with education, because they'll have kids at school or grandchildren at school, and we all rely on our doctors and our health service. I think we are as well sometimes, and I talked about at the beginning of this session, the incident on Sunday night, we are sometimes used as a battering ram by the different sides of society rather than, I think, appreciated and supported. And I think we've got to change some hearts and minds. I am seeing a significant number of editors. So when this goes out, some editors who probably haven't been invited will shout at me now, but as many editors as I think we know to come to ask me questions and me to explain the position in the PSNI today. and we are going to share my introduction in today's board report with them. And we're going to be far more proactive and strategic in making sure that without disadvantaging health or education, because that's not what this is about, certainly in my view, health are getting money that was intended for the PSNI from the budget that comes over from Westminster. It's about making sure that people understand the consequences of where we currently are. You've mentioned the numbers, and so much of our work is now in the health space. I've raised this issue with all of the people that I've already mentioned, the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State, First and Deputy First Minister, the Justice Minister, and numerous stakeholders. One of the things I think we would benefit from, and I have socialised this with all of those people and others, including people around this table, is maybe the whinging Chief Constable's voice isn't being heard, but if we got a strategic high-level review of where we are as an organisation 26 years after Chris Patton did that commission report, just maybe that will highlight what we've been saying with a different voice, in a different way, with potential solutions as how we recover the position that we're currently in. The Commission's report also says that the PSNI's budget, there is a burden on the board to make sure that we're sufficiently funded, but you have no levers to do that. You can ask, you can write letters, but you don't actually have any powers to do that. So there's a number of things that I think we can all do. And I think we need to reflect on what personally and collectively, politically, and as independent members can be done. But one thing I think might be useful for us is I talk about the implications. So I'm probably going to catch the team out now. But I'm going to ask this table to give me an example in their area. Not everybody will probably answer, but where the shortfalls have an issue for their core business. So I'll go to Bobby.
Yes, so I suppose the headline that jumps out for me is that based on benchmarking and all of our analysis, we reckon that we're probably about 900 officers short in terms of the local policing model. So that's about 600 in response, those people that respond to the 999 and 111 calls. And the most recent benchmarking that we've done nationally would suggest that we're probably now somewhere in the region of about 300 neighbourhood officers below what we should have by comparison with our most similar forces. So the fact that we're doing and our officers are doing the work that they are is nothing short of remarkable when you consider that in some cases, take neighbourhood policing, for example, we have a third less than what we should have, and we're still delivering a first-class policing service and keeping people safe.
Within operations support, we do an awful lot of, the clue is in the title, supporting the rest of the business in order to make sure that we bring offenders to justice, that we reduce crime and harm in communities. So within my teams, we've had to make really difficult resourcing decisions. So we've around 50 officers less now in those teams that support with searches. So these are the teams that go out and undertake the searches for the paramilitary crime task force, for CID, for the MIT teams, for the terrorism investigation unit. And it's because of those searches that you see the results that are in the board report. But with 50 officers less, we now have to prioritise those searches because we simply don't have as many people to meet the demand that's required in order to keep our communities safe. And the other part of my business will be roads policing, which I know is well rehearsed to you as the board, that we did take a difficult decision to remove 21 officers from the roads policing teams. But the result of that is that we're simply not as available to be proactive on the road to make sure that we find those people that are driving dangerously, driving in an unacceptable way and speeding. So it reduces our capacity to be able to do those important pieces of business each and every day that makes a difference to our communities.
And again, Frank, to answer your question in respect of crime, I suppose that the simplest and the starkest way I can put it is the fact that I have 160 fewer accredited detectives this year than I had last year. What does that mean? It means that the caseload for all those officers is increasing. And that's right across terrorist investigation units, MIT teams, right through the district CAD offices and our public protection offices. So it affects all those areas of investigations right across Northern Ireland. Caseloads going up means that we will be slower in terms of our investigations. The potential in terms of updates, etc., will be slower. And quite frankly, I suppose the opportunity for mistakes then creeps up. But it also means that particularly those officers dealing with the really high harm areas of work, for example, the rape crime unit, those officers investigating indecent images of children, etc., their exposure to trauma is also increased significantly. So I think that feeds into the sickness issue, the ill health retirement issue, the welfare, the stress issue, and moving forward. So hopefully that paints a picture in terms of crime for you, Frank.
Thanks. And you know, I should say it's difficult to talk about these things publicly because it hurts, you know, after 30 years as a public servant. These are impacts on victims and communities. But it's important to talk about it publicly. I look after the contact centre. So for most people who do need the police, that's done over the phone. And I have noticed and can see. So our ambition is, as with all police services, to answer the phone within 10 seconds when 999 is called. We used to be in the top quarter of the performing services in the UK in relation to this. You can see that performance now slipping. We're moving into the bottom third. Now, I want to reassure the public that if you ring us, 999, well over 90 calls in 100, we are answering it within 10 seconds, and the rest not long after. So don't feel that we're not answering the phones. But I've been shoring that up by ensuring we focus on the 999. That inevitably has an impact on how long it takes to answer the non-emergency calls. So you can see the average waiting times starting to increase to an average around 4 minutes when you ring 101. And inevitably that means people are then hanging up and dialing 999 because they know they're going to get a service more quickly in relation to it. Those are the real impacts for members of the public who need us in times of crisis. It's difficult to talk about, but it's important to share.
Can I just follow up? Chair, thank you very much, that Chief Constable. Now, my next ask would be, would it be possible to have those 7 or 8 bullet points on a wee cog sheet so that we can all give the same message out there we're talking to people? Yeah? Something very short and succinct. Those are scary facts. Thank you. Frank.
Yeah, we can provide you with that, Frank. And I think Chris was about to say something. Is that?
Only really to add to what's been said, and we talked a lot today about learning lessons. We don't want to make any mistakes that we have to learn lessons from, which is always a risk when resources are being reduced. But more than that, we want to continually improve. And there's so much that all of these departments would want to do on top of what they're already being restricted to do now. So we've talked about road safety, for example. There are great initiatives that we could bring in, such as, and we've talked about this in the board, roadside drugs testing. That creates extra demand across a number of our business areas, and it doesn't come with additional funding. It's a great idea. We want to do it, but there's no funding provided with that, just the will. We've talked about violence against women and girls. We'd like to bring in domestic violence protection orders, domestic violence protection notices to help us combat that terrible area. But again, that adds to demand. And it doesn't come with additional resources. So there are many initiatives that you can see across policing elsewhere globally that we'd love to introduce to continually improve and add to our service level. But they all require additional funding and resource.
Thank you. Thank you for your responses. And just from what you're saying, I had experience last night, just about 10 o'clock, I had to ring 999. And I'll talk to you about it later. It's all positive. We have a question.
It's all positive, yeah.
Well, the response was good. Yes. Keith Buchanan has a question on Sunday night, Chief, that you started the response with.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable. I appreciate your opening remarks on the Camelot incident. Obviously, you're aware that inattention or attention diverted is the highest ranking causation factor to road deaths in Northern Ireland. And the scenes we witnessed on Sunday night across social media were truly shocking. And indeed, the security breach at Lurgan Police Station was truly shocking, when individuals can climb on top of an operational police station and nothing has happened since that. So I appreciate your comments you've made on the driving so far. some people, and indeed possibly some people in this room, seem to accept, I think it's acceptable that an individual can drive with one hand on the wheel. And no doubt from Sunday night, I've had numerous people ringing me who've run in across the PSNI and have been stopped rightly with no seatbelt or driving with a mobile phone. But they're now asking serious questions. So am I charged with dangerous driving? Am I charged with careless driving? Your initial comment, Chief Constable, was that it was irresponsible driving. Dangerous driving, I don't need to tell you what it means. When your driving falls below the minimum standard expected of a competent and careful driver and includes behaviour that could potentially endanger yourself or other drivers. That's certainly what I witnessed and the people that have contacted me witnessed. And it's not only PUL community, because this is not about a flag waving out of a vehicle. This is about dangerous driving or careless driving or both. This is about the uphold of law. What happens for one individual needs to happen across everybody in Northern Ireland. So it's not about any flag, and some people get a little bit carried away with that issue. So whether it's dangerous driving, careless driving, irresponsible driving, that's up to you. And I appreciate due course will happen in that instance. My question relates to the impartiality of the police force. And does this now not matter? Is impartiality of the police force now not matter? So we've got the driving issue, which was blatantly wrong, and we've got the impartiality of the police force. Does this now not matter?
So what I won't allow is for the PSNI to be a political football, as some of you will probably have realised since I've arrived. I'm not going to sit here and have point scoring from one side or the other. The driving shouldn't have happened. I was kept, all of those words I read to you this morning is what I wrote. They're my words. I'm not going to go into any specifics about my view of the driving because that's being independently assessed. And there will be a decision as to whether that officer has breached the standards required with regards to either without due care or reckless driving, as it would for anybody else. Okay. We all sit here and know, and I would bet I've had more calls than anybody in this room about this, actually. We all know where this service and people around this table and in this organisation were with the community in that area not that many years ago. We have come a huge distance. But what happened that night in what those officers did was wrong. You celebrate things like victories, sporting victories. If Northern Ireland won the UEFA, the Euros, you do not see officers in the Met, let's say, when the Olympics were all successful, waving flags and Union Jacks. That should not have happened. And the standard of driving is something that will be looked at independently. Independence does matter. And that's why I won't have anybody telling me what we're going to do to those officers. There's a really good case, Lord Denning, and it still stands good test of time, 1968. It's a Metropolitan Police versus Blackburn, and it talks about that independence of policing. It was actually, and it's something that's been dear to my heart since I joined the job, it was actually referenced in the Schofield judgment. So yes, independence matters, Keith, but I won't let us be kicked around. Let the review happen. The officers are not going to be unduly punished, but they should not have done what they did. And it, as I say in my remarks at the beginning, it emphasises how we are a lightning rod in this organisation for societal views. We're doing our best. I don't think there's much more I can say about that. Let the process of the review take its place, including the standard of driving of the officers, actually, not just the one officer, the officers and what they did on that night.
Just to come back, if you don't mind, Chief Constable, with respect to Lurgan Police Station. Sorry, with respect to Lurgan Police Station and the security breach, what would you say on that?
I apologise, Keith. So I also saw the footage of that, and I've asked Bobby to review that around any offences that concern with the individual that was on there. I was sent that footage as well. So that's subject to us evidence gathering to see what can be done. Obviously, the items that were put at the police station, the flags, etc., were taken down that night. I think, quite frankly, that caught us unawares. I mean, we're used to having things fired at the police station, not flags put on there and celebrations. But that will be dealt with regarding any public order or criminal damage offences in the review that I've asked to be undertaken. I don't know if Bobby wants to add anything to that. No, okay.
Thank you. Jerry, you have a supplementary to this subject?
It's very hard to come in and not be political, but let me say congratulations, for getting this Maguire into the north. Actually, I think you've covered it. To be honest, I think the only thing that can be asked is if there's, and clearly there's some problems with driving, then it needs to be looked at. I have to say, and you may expect this, that I think a lot of this, because you've got loads of calls. I presume some of them were in support and some of them were attacking. The ombudsman says he got the same thing. So it's going to be divisive in that sense. But if it's a balanced view, which I think you said, if it's proportionate, then I'm happy with that. And I think we'll wait till Wednesday. And I only had one question, because there was a report I read somewhere, maybe in social media, that there was a file sent to the PPS. Is that true or not?
No file has been sent to the PPS.
Thank you. Alan Chambers, you have a question on this?
Question really was just to ask the Chief Constable for an update on what action he had taken. I'm perfectly satisfied with what he has responded. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. And Mark Turkin, you have one on this?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the Chief Constable. I entirely agree with your overview on this, and I won't say anything about any ongoing process. In terms of your analogy around the political football, however, I would ask you if you share my concern that in people's desire to score points, that they might be at risk of scoring a huge own goal by fueling this myth of two-tier policing that I hear from two communities, I have to say, and the risks that presents for the upholding and the upholders of the law.
Noted.
Thank you. Moving on to a question on hate crime from Les.
Thank you, Chair. And Chief Constable, I heard very clearly the practical impact of the resource situation from your colleagues. So I ask it in this context. But the board has recently asked for a renewed focus on securing better criminal justice outcomes for hate crimes. In light of the recent hate crime events, and I'm thinking particularly of in Antrim, can you provide an update and steps being taken to provide both reassurance for the board, but the wider community about tackling this issue?
Yeah, of course. So with regards to hate crime, I've talked about this previously. This is one of these offences that has a huge impact on victims, on society. And I will, briefly remind you of the scenes that we've seen this week, in three places in Southport, in Hartlepool, in London, all of which seem to have come about because of misinformation on social media. When I arrived here, there was a spotlight programme that reflected how the PSNI dealt with a hate crime towards the Islamic community. And I went to see members of that community to hear their story. And we've done a huge amount of work with that community and the new Islamic Centre to ensure they feel safe and supported and engaged with. And they have been extremely forward-leaning in responding to that process that's taken place. With regards to the offence in Antrim and one particular estate, when these offences started to arise, we immediately focused on them. We have got both a covert strategy to deal with those responsible and identify them. But we have introduced high visibility patrols that have led to, since the 9th of July, from which I'm certain that's not changed, the 9th of July, we've had no similar offences. You will be aware we have had an arrest, and we are looking at more arrests. But I want to reassure you that we put a gold, silver, bronze structure in place. We have a specific operational response to it. And we are doing everything we can to make sure that those that left their homes can safely return to their homes. And this is more again about wider societal issues than the PSNI. I am going to bring Bobby in, but I searched when this series of crimes began to emerge. I searched for our response previously. And last year there was a published report by the MPCC about our performance in hate crimes, and it's really positive. That overall we perform better than other forces in how we deal with these offences. That was reassuring because of the Spotlight programme that obviously you might recall that we discussed at a previous meeting. But we've got a very clear structure to deal with this. We've lent additional resources in. You understand the backdrop of how difficult that is for us to maintain. And we have got both a proactive and a reactive strategy to make sure that we can put things back into a normalised situation whilst engaging. And I'll go back to our determination to be a victim-focused organisation, whilst focusing on the needs of those individual victims as well, and reassurance to those victims. But I'll bring Bobby in if I may.
Thanks, Chief, and thanks, Les, for highlighting this really important issue. Just by way of context, our latest operational figures would show that there's somewhere in the region of about a 4% reduction overall in hate crime, but within that, a 12% increase specifically in race hate crime. What I'd say to you, Les, is we're not particularly happy with either of those two figures. When we see lower levels of overall hate crime, it actually sparks real concern for us that, again, this is a massively underreported area of vulnerability. But do let me reassure you and the board that hate crime remains a strategic priority for the service. We've just agreed our operational priorities for 2024-25. It's back in there again, and there'll be a specific emphasis on race hate this year, given that increase that we're seeing. And really the purpose of making that a strategic priority is to make sure that there is a continued focus on providing the best possible service to victims and securing the best and most tangible criminal justice outcomes, as you've referred to. As part of that process as well internally, when something is a strategic priority, it's appointed a service lead. So you're probably familiar that the service lead for hate crime is Chief Superintendent Sue Steen. And Sue is in the process just of finalising the preparation of a refresh control strategy, which is basically the organisation's commitment and plan for tackling hate crime in the year ahead. I have a very detailed update here, which I think is probably best given in another forum or perhaps in writing. But there is an opportunity coming up for us all in the form of Hate Crime Awareness Week, which will be in October of this year. You know that working together with the Policing Board, PCSPs and the Hate Crime Advocacy Service, every year PSNI puts out a kind of public awareness campaign specifically to address the issues of hate crime. So again, I think there'll be an opportunity for us collectively to have a discussion about how we best do that in order to provide those groups that are at risk of suffering hate crime with the confidence and the reassurance that they need to come forward and to engage with the police.
Thanks both of you. A very quick comeback. I mean, my brief observation is that you mentioned the words tangible criminal justice outcomes, and of course PSNI is an important cog in a larger wheel, but I can't underemphasize the importance of the public hearing about the criminal justice outcomes, and that takes quite some time after the event. But it's just critical to reassuring the public, not just what happens the day after, the week after, but there is some accountability for the kind of behaviour that we saw in Antrim. So thank you.
And just, I mean, the Chief has touched on it, but we have had a specific focus on the quality of service that is being provided by police to victims. We obviously have the Hate Crime Advocacy Service as well, which is all about supporting them through that process. But the outcomes typically are in the region of about 12% of all cases, which is not acceptable to us, and we want to continue to work with yourselves and all the other partners to significantly increase that.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question from Marion on similar subject on the anti-Islamic protests.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it is obviously linked to just what was being discussed there, Chief Constable, but it's just come to my attention on circulation, calling people to protest, and they've listed a number of locations in Northern Ireland: Newton Abbey, North Belfast, West Belfast, Carrickfergus, East Belfast, Bangor, South Belfast, and to quote them and not me, against evil Islam. And I was just curious as to, are you aware of this? And if so, what your plan is to do something about it?
So thanks, Marion. Sorry. Yeah, we are aware of it. We're still trying to understand who's behind it. There's no set organisation showing themselves on social media, which sort of defines the cowardly nature of the people who do this nonsense. There is obviously, from the social media calling, an intention to try and do something on Saturday. We have got a gold structure in place around this. We're looking into the intelligence now to see who, if anybody, is actually involved and going to respond to this. Again, I would point people to what happened in London yesterday and Hartlepool and obviously Southport. This is based on poisonous nonsense. It has no basis in a society that's seen what hatefulness can do to a society. And I would appeal for everybody to push back against any of this utter awful nonsense. But if there is going to be any gatherings, we will police them, and we will police them effectively. But I should bring Bobby in on that, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. I should also say we are aware that there have also been calls for people to gather at 12 midday at Belfast City Hall, and some suggestion that there may be a protest march. To date, no such procession has been notified to the Parades Commission. So again, I'd echo everything the Chief has said, and I'd advise that if anybody was planning on attending that, the fact that that's not notified, of course, could mean that they could see themselves liable to criminal investigation. You know, protest is a fundamental human right. But everything the Chief has said is right. You know, our real concern around this is that, in fact, it's simply people intent on stirring up fear and hatred. And I would ask that anybody that does intend to engage in any form of protest activity follows the advice that we issue to the public regularly on this. The advice is you should engage with the police, and to stay lawful, you must not endanger the safety of yourself or anybody else. You should not block any road or footpath. You should respect the rights of others, and the Parades Commission must be notified in respect of any processions.
Thank you. Nuala, you have another question on this?
And yes, I just have a quick supplementary, and some of it was answered in Bobby's response, but another part of it, of the information that's been spreading around online, is asking people who are gathering to put women and children to the front. So I just wish if the police could also make a statement as to, we see in the past, especially here, about how children are used and manipulated by communities, and if the police could also just issue a statement with regards to that.
Well, I think that was a sinister element that we'd seen, and I think it speaks volumes, can I say that, about potentially the mindset of those that are involved in this activity. But again, let me reassure you, from a policing perspective, our response will be proportionate, and as the Chief says, it'll be policed effectively.
Thank you. We're nearly there. Trevor, you have a question on the REA allowance?
Well, I have two questions, if you don't mind, Chair. I'll roll them into one. The first one, clearly, Chief, you were involved in negotiations with others, quite rightly so, to try and bring an end to industrial action, which I'm glad was successful. But in terms of the one-off payment and then the other parts, elements of that deal, has that all concluded? And maybe if you give us an update on that. I'll roll it into two questions. Right. The other one is up my logic in terms of the investigations the West Midlands was doing into the incident at the Ombudsman's investigation. And if you could update us on that one as well, please.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for both questions, Trevor. So firstly, can I just, on record and at this meeting, thank the leadership of NIPSA and Unite, who we had a number of conversations with in advance of their proposed industrial action, which would have affected our policing capability on the 11th of 12th. And they paused that action on the basis of undertakings given to them by me and the Minister for Justice. And I do want to again set out very clearly that they have a very just cause. They have been let down over a number of years because of affordability, as I understand it, around the increased payment that they were promised for the revised environmental allowance. So they wanted a payment this year. They wanted a sustained plan going forward for payments, and they also want back payment that they're owed from the amount that there was agreement in 2019 to be increased. I want to applaud Pamela for the work she's done in this area as well. Where we are currently is the interim payment will be paid in August in this month. There are some nuances to that where, for personal reasons, members may have those payments spread over a period of time, but that's with their requesting of that. We are committed to resolving this before the end of September. I'm committed to prioritising the REA in our budgetary planning. Effectively, it amounts to £1.3 million per year, which in the scheme of the budget doesn't seem a lot, but in the context of what you've heard today, you understand the challenges we've got around every pound note, effectively, of public money. We are hopeful that we can resolve these matters, but we are very, very, very sympathetic and supportive of the predicament that our police staff have found themselves in because we've let them down. So have we resolved it entirely? No. Are we on the pathway to doing it? I believe we are. I want to say well done to Pamela for the work she's done in this field. And I'll just defer to her in case I've missed anything.
No, there's nothing missed. I think it's great that we've got both the approval through Justice and Finance for the interim payment, and that will be in the August payroll, with the exception of people who opt out of that and seek to have that spread over. We are looking at options for the substantive uplift going forward, but really positive engagement with both NIPSA and Unite on that over recent days. And it will come back through the board potentially for further approval prior to getting that sorted. But we have a timeline and a Gantt and everything organised, so Sinead will be well aware of that.
And to your second question on my logic, obviously I'll hand to Chris on this, but in effect, just to remind people, we were very clear around ensuring the independence of that particular investigation because of the obvious conflict. And it's the independence of the investigation that is the pillar of ensuring that this is being done properly, by the way. It has taken far longer than any of us had anticipated, but I'll pass to Chris to give you the formal update.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Trevor. And just to be clear, this you really referenced My Logic. That's the operational name for the investigation. So this relates to an incident in the Hollywood area from back in September of last year. And as the Chief says, that's yes, it's taken a lot longer than originally anticipated. So we're about 9-10 months on from there now. So I've been purposely quiet on this point because it's sensitive. The privacy rights of everybody involved need to be respected. And it is an ongoing investigation. But because the time has passed, I am aware of growing interest and questions from the media, freedom of information requests, etc. There's a danger that if we don't give some assurance around the effectiveness of the investigation, that speculation will grow. So for that reason, I will be brief and purposeful in what I do say in response to the question. And that is to highlight that it is an independently led investigation being conducted by colleagues from West Midlands Police and is ongoing. I continue to provide strategic support and oversight to the investigation, and I am satisfied that the investigation is significantly more complex than was first anticipated, but is progressing professionally and effectively. The investigation has two principal strands. A file has been submitted to the Public Prosecution Service in relation to the first strand, and a decision is awaited. The second strand of the investigation is unlikely to progress further before September for reasons that are beyond the control of the Police Service of Northern Ireland or the independently led investigation team and the SIO. As Gold Commander for this, I have commissioned independent scrutiny of my own role, the strategy that's been adopted, and the objectives that have been set for the senior investigating officer. And consequently, through that process, I'm satisfied that practical independence is being professionally maintained and the investigation is progressing effectively under what can only be described as challenging circumstances beyond the control of PSNI and the SIO. All the relevant stakeholders, importantly, have been kept appropriately informed throughout this. I should say again that the privacy rights of those affected must be upheld, and as the investigation remains ongoing, I can't give any further detail at this time.
It's probably more a comment than a supplementary. First of all, on your first stuff, John, we welcome everything that's been done and agree with everything you've said in relation to the environmental allowance to the staff, and we'd like to see that. Obviously, certainly I would, and I know the board will be supportive because they have been to this point, because we've supported in the past. So we'll be very supportive to see that come to a conclusion and then getting what they deserve, because they have waited too long, and I think you've recognised that. In terms of the other, Chris, and listened carefully to what you said, I'm not going to push you on it, other than to say there is an awful lot of interest in it. And we will probably ask him for updates in future meetings, because as time goes on, I think people believe this should come to a conclusion and it shouldn't have taken as long, but we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And we have one final question from Alan Chambers on Casement Park.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, what discussions internally and externally has the PSNI had regarding the potential of the Euro 2028 games being staged at Casement Park? And has there been any initial scoping of the potential cost of policing these games? And will this impact directly on the already pressurised PSNI operational budget, or will mitigating funding be available from other sources to meet these costs?
Thank you for the question, Alan. So the PSNI became involved in a planning stage for Euro 2028 and discussions from October of 2021. In February of 2022, Casement Park was identified as a preferred stadium for the event. So that's from February of 2022. And from that point, gold and silver commanders were identified for that event. The estimated cost of PSNI that we have budgeted for is £17.5 million. Of that £17.5 million, the non-chargeable costs will be 4.8. The remainder will come from additional funding requests. Of course, there will be implications on the mainstream budget for the organisation in policing such an event because of the numbers of people who come here. And that presents us with particular challenges that wouldn't be faced by Angana Shikana, because they've had a 23% uplift in their budget and they're putting through 200 recruits at a time, or by the policing in England and Wales or Scotland, because of the increases in resources they've had, and yet they feel under-resourced. So, of course, it presents some challenges, but they're challenges that we're working through to make sure that we can provide the policing response that you would expect us to.
These competitions, Chief Constable, generate a lot of money for the football authorities, and I would hope that they will dip into their pocket to meet the costs, these additional costs that will be imposed upon yourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have further discussions as we go through in the preparations and negotiations around all of that with the board and with you, Alan, as well. Very happy to do that.
Supplementary from Jerry.
Or a supplementary, but I'm presuming that the 4.8 million will not make any difference to the fact that you will police. That doesn't have an effect. The amount doesn't have an effect on the fact that if it's needed to be policed, you will police the Euros, yeah?
As with all of the things we're asked to do, things go on the list, they don't come off. We will police, and we will police as well as we possibly can. And, you know, this board holds us to account, and when things go wrong, you rightfully do that. I'm confident that we'll be able to provide a pleasing response for the Euros.
It was just in case there was an argument here that the amount that the police have to pay as an argument against the Euros coming here. I just wanted to make a point. Thank you.
I want the Euros here in 2028. Can I be very clear about that? And I shouldn't have said that. I apologise, but I would like the Euros to be here in 2028.
Thank you. That concludes today's meeting. Thank you, Chief Constable, for bringing your team here, and thank you for all of your answers. Thank you to all the board members here who have raised today some very, very difficult issues in relation to some very sensitive cases that are ongoing, and thank you for raising those. Once again, can I apologise for the late kickoff today if we want to carry on the theme that we finished on. We'll be back here on Thursday, the 5th of September, 2024, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
Thank you.